morning, good afternoon for you guys on the East Coast. My name is Susanne Mariga, and I am the Chief Accountant here at Mariga CPA. And today's topic is regarding a topic I think is very relevant in what's going on today, and that's creating a culture of inclusivity. And to be honest with you, I am humbled. I am humbled to actually even speak on this topic because in many ways, I am no expert to be able to speak on this topic, but I believe that it's a conversation that needs to happen. It's a conversation that needs to start because in the entrepreneurial world, we as small businesses, we are the backbone of the economy. We are the ones that are going to be the ones that bring about change. And at the end of the day, us as small businesses, we're going to be the ones that create a world of equal opportunities. And this means that we have the power in our hands as small business owners to create and give opportunities to those that wouldn't have it. And also to be able to give opportunities to those, to be able to give them a chance to live a life of liberty and be able to pursue their own happiness. And although I don't have all the answers, I don't have all the answers to everything that's going on, and I don't have all the answers of creating an environment of inclusivity. I don't think any of us do, but I feel that I can share from my own experiences. And that is what I would like to do today. So for me, my story started actually November 26, 1993. And I'm going to date myself here. But November 26, 1993, it was the day after Thanksgiving. Back then in the day, we called it Black Friday. When there was a Black Friday, when it wasn't just everyone go out for shopping on Thanksgiving. We called it Black Friday way back in November 26, 1993. And I had just started my job at Joann Fabrics in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I chose to work at Joann Fabrics because there was no way in this world that my parents were going to be able to buy me a prom dress. And Joann Fabrics has a crazy Thanksgiving sale after Thanksgiving sale every year, crazy after Thanksgiving sale. And if I was strategic, if I planned it right, if I was employed on Black Friday, that would mean that I wouldn't only get the Black Friday sales, but I was going to get an extra 50% off as an employee. And I needed to make a prom dress. There was no way in the world that my parents were going to make or buy a prom dress for me. They just weren't going to do it. It wasn't in our budget. And frankly, they didn't even want me to go to prom. And I was dead set on making and sewing this slamming prom dress because my goal was I was going to walk into my prom looking like a supermodel. Okay. And November 26, 1993 was a really long day because you guys can imagine working retail on the day after Thanksgiving, the masses of people that come in through the door. And it was so busy and so hectic. I hardly actually even remember what the day was like. But towards the end of my shift, an older white gentleman came in and his wife. And they came in the store because they were buying calico fabric for their quilting project. His wife was going to make a quilt. And for you guys that don't know me, I think I might have just gone blurry for just a second. For you guys that don't know me, I love calico fabric. It's like one of my favorite fabrics in the world. And for you guys that aren't familiar with calico fabric, what it is, it's this cotton fabric and it has like all sorts of flowery prints. You can get it in various different color prints. It looks beautiful on little girl dresses. It looks really great on quilts. I love calico fabric. And this lady, she bought a lot of calico fabric. I mean, she bought tons of calico fabric. She bought reams of calico fabric. And at the end, I was literally cutting her fabric. And at the end of the fabric of what she needed for her quilt, there was always this little remnant amount that was left. And back then, Joann Fabrics sold the remnant fabric for 5 cents an inch. And so I convinced her, hey, if you're going to buy all this fabric, you might as well buy the remnant. It's only 5 cents each. And you can make a bow. You can make a mini quilt if you have a grandchild. There's a lot of things you can do with this extra little remnant piece of fabric. And I don't know what happened, but apparently I convinced her to buy this fabric. And I didn't think much about it. After all, I was 17 years old. I was just doing my job. Later on that spring, there was a posting in my high school. A company called Procter & Gamble was looking to hire internships. And they were looking for promising interns for their summer internship program. Particularly, they wanted to fill their diversity program. And at Joann Fabrics, I earned $4.25 an hour, but I heard that Procter & Gamble was paying their interns $300 a week. $300 a week. That was $3.25 more than what I was earning at Joann Fabrics. And being an 18-year-old kid, this was an opportunity I could not pass. So literally, I ran to my local library. I got a book on how to create resumes. I literally took out my word processor and I literally started to type up my resume. And now this is 1994 and they didn't have computers back then. Computers were extremely expensive. So this word processor was all that I had. And I created a resume. And when I arrived at my interview at Procter & Gamble, I had on my aunt's hand-me-down gray suit. I had a borrowed attaché case from my mother because that's what I thought when you went to interviews, you had to bring an attaché case. And I had my resume. And I waited out in the hallway for what felt like hours because so many people wanted this opportunity. In fact, I waited so long, I actually met my best friend out in that hallway that day. And when Procter & Gamble finally called my name, I sat down at a desk and I sat across from an older white gentleman, and he had a list of questions. Actually, he had pages of questions for me. And I answered them to the best of my ability. But at the end of the day, all I wanted him to do was get to the end and tell me that I was getting a $3.25 an hour raise, right? Because I was 18 years old. All I wanted was that $3.25 an hour. But then the older man, he asked me a really strange question at the end. He bent over, he peered at me, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And I was embarrassed. I didn't know if I'd ever seen him on a bus. I didn't know if I'd seen him on the street. I couldn't even remember meeting that man ever. And then he proceeded to tell me that I was the young lady that helped him and his wife out last Thanksgiving buy fabric for her project. And somehow in that interaction, I had really impressed me. And I had no idea that that day that I was cutting fabric for the senior vice president of sales at Procter & Gamble. The only person that he reported to was the CEO. And I had no idea that on that Friday, that Black Friday, that event would change the projectile of my life forever. I had no clue. You see, I was a young Black and Chinese girl from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was from a neighborhood called Seven Hills. And I went to a high school that was on probation for the past 20 years. Very few of my classmates ever went to college. Quite a few got pregnant that year. And most of them were looking forward to having careers working at McDonald's, local grocery stores, theme parks. And that will be the life that they live even to this day. But November 26, 1993 gave me an opportunity and an advantage that most American youth, and I don't care what color they are, blacks, brown, whites, most of these kids will never have that opportunity. Because as an 18-year-old intern at Procter & Gamble within their research and development department, I was quickly enrolled in Procter & Gamble College. And because I was enrolled in Procter & Gamble College, I got to take unlimited Microsoft Office classes. I got to attend professional development classes where they taught me how to dress, how to behave in an interview, how to interact with my older peers. And get this, my bosses and my mentors at Procter & Gamble, they went by the title Dr. So-and-so. And so at the age of 18, I was learning statistics. I was learning cause and effect. I was learning probability, and I was even learning a little bit of chemistry. And I did 2 years of internships at Procter & Gamble, and I only left because at some point I realized that I wasn't going to pursue a degree in science. I was going to become an accountant, and I needed a Big Four experience. And to be honest with you, I just didn't want to waste their time anymore, knowing that I was going to go a different direction in my career. But when I left Procter & Gamble, I left Procter & Gamble polished and trained. I left Procter & Gamble with a gift. And for you guys that don't know about Procter & Gamble is an extremely hard company to get into. They're the makers of Tide, they make Ivory soap, they make Pantene, extremely hard company to get into. In fact, they require what they call a problem-solving test. And from the analysis of my peers that interviewed that day with me, only 10% of the people passed that test. But what Procter & Gamble did for me as an intern, it allowed me, because of my experience here, because I worked at a company that was so hard to get into, it allowed me to get A-listed on every place that I interviewed with thereafter. And I ended up getting offers with all the Big Four accounting firms. And I chose Arthur Andersen because I wanted the best experience, and I wanted Arthur Andersen in their Chicago office. And I felt that by working in their headquarters, I would be exposed to blue chip clients, I would gain the most incredible experience, and I felt that it would put my career on a trajectory that I could pick and do whatever I wanted in my life. When I signed my offer with Arthur Andersen, the HR director called me almost immediately after I signed. And he told me, you know, Susanne, most of our recruits start in September, but we have a very small group that's starting in July. And if you want to start in July, I have an open spot for you. You are welcome to start. Now, I was a broke college kid, broke college kid, okay? And I was signing a lease for $1,000 a month to live in Chicago, Illinois. And I figured that the earlier I started making money, the better it was because I needed to be able to pay my rent. And so I chose that July start date. But I had no idea that starting in July would put me at an advantage. I had no idea that starting in July would put me at an advantage. You see, by starting in July, I got to attend St. Charles Training Center before any of my peers that started in September would. It also meant that I got to complete 2 full audits before any of my peers even started. And what that meant, because I got an early start, what it meant that by the end of the first year when my peers were just starting to figure out what an audit is, I was already starting to lead audit engagements after my first year. They labeled me as an in charge. And that's something that most people don't even get to do until after they've been with the firm for 2 years. This was an advantage. And this advantage that I received because I early started in July, what that meant was I was early identified by Arthur Anderson as what they called an A player. Now, Anderson literally ranks you. They force rank you. They force ranked you into an A, B, and C categories. The C's were the worst performers. They were usually let go immediately by the time the summer come. And the A's were pretty much on partnership track is what that was. And I was labeled A because I had an advantage. I had started earlier than everyone else. I had more experience. And as someone that was labeled A performer, my partner that was doing my review, one of the partners of the firm, he allowed me to attend a derivative training in New Jersey. And this training was something they only offered to seniors that were in their third year or managers. And I got to attend this training as a first year in Anderson. And I got a lot of exposure and I got a lot of experience that most people would never get just because I was cutting fabric on November 26, 1993. Now, this book, I'm going to share with you guys this book. I love this book. I love the book Profit First, but I love this book. This is a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And I highly recommend you read this book. It's an amazing book, a very, very good book that really will change your perspective on a lot of things. And for you guys that are not familiar, outliers is a statistical term. And what it refers to is things that fall out of the bell-shaped curve. It's your oddballs, your exceptions, your things that happen outside of the normal. And a lot of times we call these the paranoia, right? The paranoia or the phenomenal. And our world is obsessed with this term called outliers. We're obsessed with them. We call them geniuses. We call them superstars. We see them as being genetically gifted, somehow better than everyone else. And almost like they're some type of super being, some genetically advantaged specimen. But in the book Outliers, what it details is that if you pull back the layers, pull back the truth, in just about every single case of geniosity or superiority, there is always an advantage. There is always an advantage. Now, in the book Outliers, it refers to the sport of baseball. And I love baseball. How many of you guys love baseball out there? And what it says is that in the baseball industry, for those that are playing in the major leagues, most of the major league players are born in the month of August. They are born in the month of August. And it's interesting because the cutoff period for tryouts for non-school related baseball leagues is in July. So that means if you were born in August, you had a whole year, you were most likely a whole year older than everybody else that was trying out for baseball in your school that year. And being a whole year older, that meant you were more physically fit. You probably were more coordinated, right? Because your body gets more coordinated with your mind as you get a little bit older. And so you're probably a little bit faster. You're probably a little bit stronger. And so obviously you're having an advantage, right, than your peers, even though you're in the same age group. Now, the same trend is seen in European soccer. In European soccer, what we're finding is that the majority of the players that make it to the Premier League in European soccer are born between September and November. Ironically, the cutoff again for European soccer is September 1st. So again, you've got bigger kids that are in the same age rank, that are more mature, their minds are more mature, their bodies are more mature, and they're probably more coordinated beginning the race. Now, Malcolm Gladwell argues that the superiority of the elite players is actually not in their innate abilities, but rather in their date of birth and the sport that they select to play. And because these children are naturally older when they start to play against their other team members and their other classmates at tryout, they're more physically and mentally able to perform at a different level than their teammates because they're stronger, they're more coordinated. And this advantage that they have because they're simply just a few months older, almost a year older, allow them to be selected on their school teams. And not only are they selected on their school teams, but they rise as your top stars, right? And because they are already the stars on their team, they're naturally pinned out. They're naturally asked to participate in other opportunities. They're naturally asked to go to special training camps. They're asked to participate in outside coaching, and eventually that advantage just compounds and they become the next all-star players. And so the question is the advantage really an advantage genetically? Data and studies continues to prove otherwise time and time again, sort of like the advantage that I got on November 26, 1993. Now, the US Census study for 2017 tells us that the average Black family earns about $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year is what the average Black family earns. And in comparison, the average white family earns about $68,000 a year. And what this means is that a Black family has to work 1.7 times harder, almost twice as hard in comparison to a white family, in order to have and achieve the same standard of living. And so what this means is that as a Black child, when they graduate from high school, if they even go to college, their family had to work twice as hard just to get them there. This is an advantage for white America. And maybe this advantage meant that you had the opportunity to go to college in a generation earlier than a Black family, or maybe there was just less stress at home, right? Because there was more money so that you can have a better work-life balance. I don't know exactly how that advantage plays out, but statistically there is an advantage to being white in America. Now, I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel guilty. I don't want you to feel guilty. But I do want you to understand that your Black and brown counterparts are starting a race with their ankles cut. And before you consider someone less than you, understand where you are and that you are where you are because you are an outlier. You had an advantage, just like the advantage that I had on November 26, 1993, because I worked at the right fabric shop at exactly the right hour. I remember when I was wrapping up my last day of my first year of internship with Procter & Gamble, my team took me to lunch. And we went to this restaurant called TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. And I sat with my team in TGIF, and my team was, they consisted of PhDs and scientists. And I remember as we were sitting at this table enjoying our lunch, I remember how awkward I felt. And I felt awkward because that day, my old high school classmate was working as our server. And my classmate and we had gone to school since elementary school. We had played together at recess. I had went to her house. I had ate at her table. And now, literally, our roads and our futures were quickly divesting. And even though in my heart of hearts, I knew that I was no better than she was, I was going to live a very different life than the life that she would experience. And frankly, I felt guilty. I felt guilty because her life would always be the same. However, now my life had unlimited possibilities. And so the question is, why change? Why change? Why not continue to cruise on an advantage, right? Why not continue to let a good thing just keep flowing? And the truth is, your advantage will only continue to grow and compound. Just like these baseball players, your advantage only continues to grow and compound. And I'll be honest with you, as a high net worth tax accountant, I realize you cannot ever make anyone do anything they don't want to do. There are loopholes for everything, including paying taxes. You guys have heard Warren Buffett brag that he pays less taxes than his secretary. There are loopholes for everything. You can never make anyone do anything they don't want to do. So today, I am going to give you some reasons to consider embracing diversity and creating a culture of inclusivity in your businesses. So point number one is diversity is good for business. Diversity is good for business. You know, Nielsen is a rating company, and our family got selected one year to participate in the Nielsen ratings. And they give you these pagers, right? They give you these pagers that you literally monitor everything you do, what radio stations you're listening to, what television programs that you're watching to. They are a ratings company, and they literally generate statistics based upon the data that you are providing them. And what Nielsen found is that African Americans spend $1.2 trillion a year, and Hispanics have the purchasing power to spend $1.7 trillion. And the minority market as a whole is $3.9 trillion. Diversity is really good for business. And when you fail to attract diverse buyers, you limit your ability to grow as a company. In fact, you'll find that most SEC companies that are publicly traded out there, they have diversity initiatives. Check out the National Minority Supplier Development Council. You will see every single SEC company listed that has a diversity initiative. And I will tell you, all of them have a diversity initiative. And while I was at Procter & Gamble at an all-intern meeting, during the meeting, one of the African-American interns recommended that P&G consider investing in an ethnic hairline. And at the time, P&G did not have an ethnic hairline. However, a few years later, P&G released a new Pantene hairline for natural hair care. And it was a product that was targeted towards people of color. And today, their shampoo and conditioner is one of my favorites. And my daughter actually uses it. So it's literally a product that's being passed down to generation and generation, all because of a single idea. Diversity is good for business. Point number 2. Minorities are increasing in the workforce. Minorities are increasing in the workforce. Now, there was an article that was published in September 2019 by CNBC, and the article stated that for the first time in history, minorities are now making up the new hires, the majority of new hires between the ages of 25 and 54. And guess what? Us ladies are leading the way. So we are leading the way in terms of new hires. So if part of your business plan includes scaling, creating new opportunities, or even moving forward as a national brand, at some point you will need to consider hiring and retaining minorities. Point three. If you want to recruit and retain any race, and I mean any race, you're going to need to create a culture where your employees feel valued, appreciated, wanted, and they feel that there are opportunities for growth. And I find that most A players, no matter what their race is, no matter what their background is, they're not looking for a handout. They're not looking for free money. In fact, what they're looking for is just a fair chance to compete at the game. And one thing that Procter & Gamble did extremely well was they made me feel part of the team. And on my first day at Procter & Gamble, my colleagues invited me to sit at their table for lunch. And the next day, someone actually came by my office and said, Susanne, we're going to lunch. Do you want to join us? And every day somebody came by my office until I frankly got the point that I had a seat at a table and I had a place at a table if I wanted to eat with them. And so I very really understood that someone always stopped by my office. Now, at some point I was 18 years old and I wanted to sit with people my own age because that was just the cool thing to do. And I didn't want to sit there anymore, but I always knew that I had a place at their table. Feeling welcome is important. Point 4, mentorship is critical. Now, at Anderson, I was assigned a mentor. And my mentor, he would bring me purposely to different jobs and projects that he was working on. And this allowed me to have exposure to opportunities that normally I would not have experienced. And to this day, I am grateful for my mentor. I am grateful for him because what he did and allowed me to do was to get really comfortable speaking to CEOs, CFOs, controllers, people of power that did not even look like me. Mentorship is important. Now, if you are going to have a mentorship program, I recommend be very intentional about your mentor and mentee assignments. Make sure your mentors really want to serve in that role and make sure they have the capability to act as a mentor in that role. You'll be surprised how many people are taking positions for political reasons that don't want to be there, right? So make sure that when you assign a mentor or mentee to your employees, that they really want to serve in that capacity. And while I was at Anderson, when I was first recruited, the mentor that was assigned to me, he was a third-year senior, and he was on the cusp of being promoted to manager. And you can imagine being a first year at Anderson and seeing my mentor getting promoted to manager. And not only seeing my mentor being promoted to manager, but seeing my Asian mentor promoted to manager. Imagine the impact that had on my career. Imagine the impact that gave me of where and how far I could go with this firm, because now I saw my mentor get promoted as a manager. The partner that I reported to at Anderson, well, he was not a person of color. He was a white man. However, he was the head of the entire financial service sector at Anderson. He was the head. And so he had hundreds of people reporting to him. Imagine anyone telling him if he approved my class for hedge fund training in New Jersey that he couldn't do that. Nobody was going to tell that man that I couldn't do that. He was the power that no one could pass up. Imagine the doors that he opened for me. Assign mentors to your staff that want to serve in that capacity and have the impact to serve in that ability as a mentee. Blacks on average earn 87 cents for every dollar that their white coworkers make doing the same job. Hispanics earn 91 cents for every dollar that a white person makes working the same job. To create a culture of inclusivity, you must give everyone a fair chance, no matter what their race, color, creed, or sexual orientation is. Pay everyone fairly for the work that is done. If you're paying your minorities less than your white team members, ask yourself why. Create opportunities and make sure everyone is invited to sit at the table. And for those team members that are from a disadvantaged background, take time, give them feedback, give them encouragement. Encouragement is so important. I actually recommend give them extra encouragement. Go out of your way, make them feel welcome, because as people of color, we often feel something called imposter syndrome. We feel that we don't really belong there, especially when we're in groups that nobody looks like us except for the secretary and the janitorial staff. It's hard to feel that you belong in that environment. But when you smile and you say hello and you acknowledge us in the room, saying hello goes farther than you will ever imagine. I remember when I was interning my first year at P&G, I wore jeans to work. And I wore jeans because it was a lab environment, and heck, everybody wore jeans to work except for the PhDs. But I felt really comfortable in jeans. After all, I was a kid barely out of high school, and I have to admit my jeans were often not wrinkled, and I often had a matching just as wrinkled t-shirt to match it. Not the best looking kid, right, at going to work. But one day, an African-American secretary, she took me to a corner and she told me, you know, Susanne, you'll probably go great places one day. You'll probably go farther than me, but people are going to judge you based upon how you present yourself. And then she recommended that I take my next paycheck and I go out and buy some professional clothes. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. That day, I'm going to admit it. I was miffed. I was irritated. I was thinking, how dare she talk to me like that? I was upset. But when I really thought about it, she was absolutely right. The standards that would apply to me would apply to nobody else in that company. I had to present at a higher level. And that weekend, I went out, I spent my entire $400 paycheck on new clothes, and I never wore jeans back to work again. And feedback, no matter how uncomfortable it is, if you want to develop your team, and this is regardless of their race, color, creed, or sexual orientation, if you want to develop your team, you're going to need to give consistent, honest feedback, and you're going to need to treat everyone the same way, because consistent, honest feedback is how you're going to build a power team. And some of you guys are wondering, so how do I recruit diverse players, right? How do I recruit diverse players? And I'm going to be honest with you, you don't just want to bring on anyone. You don't want to do that, but you're going to build a team similar to the way that you already do so. What qualities do you look for in a team member? What skill set is necessary for them to do the job? And if all qualities are equal in your applicants and the only difference is color, if your gut is telling you to pick the one that looks like you, I'm going to challenge you to challenge your gut and ask yourself, why is your gut telling you to do that? Force yourself to answer that question. Force yourself, take it a step further, document your reason why. And then some of you will ask, how do I know that my team isn't already inclusive so that everyone feels welcome? How do I know that my team isn't already inclusive? And for you, I'm going to say, look at your statistics, look at your stats. Does your business demographic reflect the demographic of the population that surrounds you? And if it does, what is your retention rate? And even better, what is your promotion rate? Is the turnover of your minority staff members the same as your white team members? And if it is the same, are your promotion rates the same for your minority team members as it is for your white team members? And if your retention rate and your promotion rates are the same for your minorities as well as for your non-minority team members, you are probably creating an environment where everyone feels valued, needed, wanted, respectful, and hopeful of future opportunities. At this point, I would love to bring over author Mitch Shepard to discuss what it's like to create an environment of inclusiveness within your business. Now, Mitch is an author. She's also an applied behavior scientist, and she is the founder of the Human Inclusion Partnership, which specializes in helping corporations value and leverage their diverse talents. So welcome, Mitch, to our platform. How are you?
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Your stories are incredible. I mean, I just sat here with the biggest smile on my face listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this too. I always like to start with, tell me a bit about your background. Why did you pick this field? How did you even come into this?
Yeah, well, okay. So the quick and dirty, because it's a long story, as most of our professional backgrounds are, is that I actually, oddly enough, I studied accounting and business economics, thinking that I had a mother who was an accountant, thinking I was going to go into the field of public accounting. But what I really fell in love with through my college years was the outdoors, like completely 180 from accounting. And what I really loved was working with people around personal growth, challenging themselves, pushing themselves hard. So at the final hour, I decided to go into the outdoor field instead of the accounting field. And through that time, I worked for a company called Outward Bound, where I would take people on anywhere from 5 to 28-day long wilderness expeditions. Took me a while to gain the experience because I had studied accounting, not outdoor education. But what we would do is we used the outdoors as a vehicle for growth. So in those days, what we did is we took anywhere from corporate executives, management teams, adults going through major life transitions, death, job change, divorce, health crisis, something that really shook them. And I also led teenage groups. And the teenage groups were kids from all across the country, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, different genders, different race, etc. And I didn't know it then, but that was my early learning in how to help facilitate people working well across difference, and how to build trust and connection and relationships, to keep each other safe, to climb mountains, to run rivers. As I got to be about 30, I started to realize, wow, I'd really like to be more stable, not move every 4 months to follow the seasons. But I loved that work around growth. So I transitioned, went to grad school for applied behavioral science, and began working in corporate environments as a coach and consultant around team development work. And in that work, to be honest, I had a lot of male white executives who were starting to get the message that diversity is good for business. And back then, 10 years ago, diversity meant women. That's all it meant, pretty much, right? Now, luckily, we have broadened that lens to mean all kinds of different diversity. But I saw these guys genuinely caring, but getting in their own way a whole lot in terms of attracting women, retaining women, attracting people of color, retaining people of color. I saw them getting in their own way. So about a decade ago, I just decided, I got to figure out, I'm no expert either. I know a lot more now than I did 10 years ago, but I realized the world needed something. These leaders needed to be able to have the skills to match their intentions, and they didn't. So I've done a ton of learning from other professionals and whatnot to get into the business that I'm in now. And where I took first a real interest in women's advancement and inclusion, I've now just realized, after a trip around the world with my family recently, it just opened up my whole heart and my whole lens around how, like, when we traveled, I looked at people in India and Africa, and I have worked with so many people of color over the years in the United States in these corporations where, as you mentioned, they were like the first and the only of their race. And my whole heart opened to, wow, I wonder what it's like for them to be in American culture, are they able to preserve their culture? Do they feel welcome here? Do they feel lonely? Do they feel judgmental? Like, what is going on? So anyway, my passion just lies in helping the marginalized voices and people in companies to have more influence, power, and affluence. So I think we were meant to meet each other, Susanne.
I think so, particularly at this point in time. And I just want to say, like, if you read the book Outliers, it takes almost 10 years, he says, to become an expert, 10,000 hours. So that means you are an expert right now. So you've been doing it long enough. And that's an amazing, beat that you're taking on, or that you've taken on in your life to bring that purpose, really, to help these companies be able to diversify their workforce. It changes a lot of lives, and it beats a lot of households and creates a lot of opportunities. So that is amazing that you're doing that. Can you tell me, Mitch, one of the questions that people, I imagine, are asking is, what are the advantages of creating a diverse workforce? Why not keep things the same? Why not keep an all non-minority workforce, right? It's easier you probably already have it in some cases. What is the advantages of really doing that?
Well, beyond it just being the fair and human thing to do, because let's assume everyone on this call already agrees on that. The business reasons are many. I mean, there is so much data, and I really encourage you, if you haven't actually seen the data, email me. I will send you some really great data on why. But practically speaking, companies are more profitable, they are more innovative. And you mentioned something, Susanne, about talent attraction. So one of the biggest challenges, and I know things have changed recently with COVID and so many people being laid off, but up until about 3 months ago, there was an extreme war for talent in the world, right? And so many companies competing for diverse talent, wanting to get diverse talent in. And I have talked to many people of color who say, if I'm looking at a company and their board is all white, or their board is all male, or I look at the executive ranks of a company and I don't see anybody who looks like me, I'm not going to choose that company if I have a choice to choose one that I see opportunity for myself. So one reason is you have a much better chance of attracting talent. The second is, and I'll use an example, a very gigantic, I won't use the name because I'm under confidentiality agreements, but a gigantic retailer in the world who sells a lot online realizes that their website platform, if it looks the same all across the world, they will not sell as much. So a really perfect example, I was invited to go to Luxembourg a few years ago to work with this cross-cultural team from all over the world to talk about how the website needed to be adapted for China, for India, for Thailand, for all these different countries. Now, if they had just used US-centric viewpoint on what these websites and sales platforms should look like across the world, they would not sell because it was just a totally different culture. And another practical story I'll just share is I was working with a client and he came in, he had adopted this team. It was a fitness band. It was a company that built a lot of products, but one of them was this fitness band. And we met for lunch one day and he said, "Oh, I have a gift for you, Mitch." And he gave me this watch and I put it on and it was the clunkiest thing. It was stiff, it was too big, it had gaps on either side. You know, you couldn't use it like on your keyboard, you'd have to take it off before you typed because it just didn't fit. And I looked at him and I know him well, so I felt like I could be this direct. And I said, "I'm just curious, did anyone else put this band on besides men?" He just kind of laughed. He's like, "I know, it's atrocious." I mean, he was able to take it with humility. But when our products and our services are built by the people who are going to use them, they're better. And so, I mean, I could go on all day about this topic alone, but I know you have a lot more questions. But I just would say to folks listening that if you aren't yet convinced of the business case for diversity, do your homework. Do your homework. Because leaders in particular are being called right now to make the case for diversity. And if you don't already know yourself, if that information and that passion and that commitment isn't already living inside of you, the very first step is to figure that out, right? Because you can't go sell something, you can't go advocate for others if you're not believing it in your own heart and mind.
That is amazing. So really understanding that business diversity is good for business and knowing the reason why it's for yourself, right? How that applies to your business is important. Mm-hmm. And so the next question is, so if I want to take steps to create a diverse environment, and let's say I don't have diversity right now in my company, and a lot of companies don't. I mean, I've worked in companies that did not have diversity, and you know, I'm sure at this point it might be an embarrassment for them, you know, and what is the first steps you do to even begin to create a diverse environment? What do you do? What needs to happen to make that first step to create a diverse culture in your company?
Yeah. Well, the very first step is that there's lots of tactics to do that, right? But the very first step is back to sort of the business case and the commitment. Some of the work that I do is helping executive teams actually align around, this is something we care about. This is something we have to make happen. Do we all agree that this is important? Because otherwise, people will say the right things. Oh, yeah, diversity is important, diversity is important. But when it comes right down to hiring diverse candidates, they miss out every time. Like your point about when it comes right down to two on paper equal candidates, ask yourself the question, why are you continuing to choose the white candidate, right? So having that commitment and from the beginning is huge. Requiring diverse candidate slates. is big, but it's not enough. So what I see a lot of companies doing right now is saying, we aren't going to hire anyone until a certain percentage of the people that we're interviewing are people of color, women, etc. But the problem is they're measuring activity, not results. They're saying, oh, we win. Let's have a party for ourselves because we got, 3 people of color on the interview loop. Well, that doesn't mean a thing unless some of those numbers are translating into actual hires. So I would challenge leaders who are starting to do the right thing to say, are you getting the results that you're actually wanting? Stop measuring activity and start measuring results. The other piece around getting diversity is there are often, what happens when you look at sort of the pyramid in most companies is that a lot of companies will brag that, oh, we have a great representation of, people of color or women up until a certain point. Or I've heard companies say, oh, half of our workforce is, women or people of color, blah, blah. But then if you look at where that stops, it's called the broken rung, it's called the glass ceiling, et cetera. And
the male staff, right? The secretaries.
Exactly. And so they're not reaching past a certain level where they get more power, influence, and affluence, right? Where they can go back and spread the wealth with their families and communities. So the point is, you mentioned mentorship. So one of the things I talk about with the executive teams and leaders that I work with is the difference between mentoring, which is very important, and sponsoring, which is the proven result, is that mentors talk to you about how you can be better, how you can learn, how you can grow. They give you that great feedback to improve. Sponsors talk about you when you're not in the room. They advocate for you. They open doors for you. They kind of put you under their wing and bring you along in your career. And so one of the research-based proven ways to get more diversity in the ranks of leadership is for those executives who already have positions of power to pick high potential diverse candidates who already exist within their businesses and essentially take responsibility for getting to know that person, trust that person, give that person stretch opportunities, yes, mentor them, but when it comes time for promotion decisions and reviews, you go to bat for that person, right? So it really is kind of this one-to-one or one-to-many need to turn mentorship into sponsorship. Mentorship is not enough. The other thing is rooting out bias in performance reviews. So I've been having conversations with absolutely every client in the past 10 days. Everyone wants to know, how do I help? How do I help? How do I help? And I was talking to a CEO of a recruiting firm just yesterday, and he said, Mitch, it's been really sad because they work with a lot of hot startups. And he said, they will ask us as a recruiting firm, we want you to find diverse candidates. And he said, but we have the data that shows that we will deliver you diverse candidates, but they aren't making it into the roles you're hiring for. So there's clearly a problem. There's a gap between you wanting diverse candidates and you actually getting diverse candidates. So I asked him the question, do you offer any kind of bias interview training? And he said, we offer that to our clients, but they want the quick solution. They say, oh, we don't have time for that. We don't need that. We're committed to this, I promise. It doesn't happen. So more people need to get educated about what are the reasons why candidates aren't making it through. And then the other piece is that this one's a little tricky, but diverse, usually the people within your company, the women, the people of color, they have a lot to say about what they experience in the workplace, right? They're not always willing to share it. They don't always feel like they can trust you to share it. They don't always believe they'll be heard. But if you can be genuinely curious with your employees of color and genuinely curious with women about the experience, they will have stories to tell you about what that interview process was like. They will have stories to tell you about what it's like to be part of the team that they're part of. And some of those stories will be happy stories, like some of the ones that you've told about really supportive colleagues. But some of those stories aren't going to be pretty. And until you open up the conversation and listen to your employees, your diverse employees, you've got to create, like you said, I think your number 3 was culture is so important. And the only way to improve your culture is to actually understand from the point of view of women and people of color, what does the culture feel like to them? Not what does the culture feel like to you as the senior leader, which is usually a white male, but what does the culture feel like to everyone? Because that's how you keep people, right? Like diversity is getting them in. Inclusion is actually valuing them, unleashing them, allowing them to show up with their full authentic strengths and talents. And that's where a lot of people fall down.
Right. No, that is so true because I mean, as an employer, it's expensive to bring people on. It's expensive to train them, to invest in them. I mean, even what I did with P&G when they sent me to their P&G college, I mean, I'm sure that was thousands of dollars that they were spending on that. And to lose that person because they don't feel like there's opportunities, to feel like they're not being heard, it's a tragedy. It's a tragic loss to lose that. And I mean, like you're saying, I didn't realize that maybe the things that I was going through was very intentional, that, I did get the head of financial services assigned to me. And I'll tell you, there were colleagues that did not get the experience that I got, colleagues that quit very early, that were of color. And so, I just kind of got the lucky stars that kind of signed up, or maybe they had someone like you, Mitch, working behind them.
Well, I'm telling you, you started this, Susanne, by saying, I'm not an expert. I just have my lived experience. I have some stories to share. But as I listened to you go through your 6 or 7 points about, here are my tips for you creating an inclusive and diverse environment, I was like, you could basically write the book on it. I mean, really, like tons of people are doing research on what works and what doesn't. And your story represents why this works, So you know more about this than you think.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. So in terms of creating an environment of inclusivity, because one of the things that I hear about that people tell me is, being a tax accountant, like I said, there's excuses for everything. There's excuses for everything. Yeah, you can get to the point that you don't pay any taxes because there's so many excuses and loopholes.
Yeah.
And one of the excuses that I hear is, I just can't find the diverse talent to fill that position. I just can't find it, right? I interviewed hundreds of people. I can't find that person out there. What do you have to say for that, Mitch?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So one is, you got to look at the data to see if you're telling yourself the truth. So if you are in biotech, as an example, and you can look across all colleges that are having graduates that are then going into careers in biotechnology. If 15% of the graduates are of a certain demographic, and yet you look inside your own company and you only have 5%, then there is a gap and there is talent available, and it's time to be honest about that gap, right? So don't fool yourselves. Now, if you look at the data and you say, oh wow, 15% of people graduating in the sciences are African American, and we only have 5% and we have 16% African American in our company. Okay, so you're beating the number by a percentage point, but it's still not good enough. And you got to ask yourself, what are some early things we can invest our money, our energy, and our commitment to, such as going into schools, going into college programs, finding out where the leaky pipelines are in science, having some, creating some initiatives within your own company to actually change the number of people going into and having access to those programs. Because if companies don't start taking some early intervention, some creativity around early intervention in schools and building up a pipeline of future talent, we're going to be having the same conversation right now, or in a decade or 20, 30 years, as we're having right now. So at some point, companies need to use, I think, some of their resources to fuel the pipeline.
Got it. And that makes sense. Kind of like what P&G did with me, they recruited me straight out of high school. Right. And at that point, I had decent grades, but a lot of other kids, white kids probably had same good grades too. But at that point, everything was equal except for color. So it's just a matter of.
And there is one more thing on this, because another recent conversation I had is that sometimes there's this affinity bias in some of the, I'll just call them the fancier fields, like the technology and medical and biotechnology, a lot of the clients we work with. And for instance, there's this, oh, they're from Harvard, oh, they're from Princeton, oh, they're from these colleges, right? So their first choice in who they hire often are people that have that pedigree, right? Mm-hmm. And yet there are people coming out of lesser known schools who aren't able to compete for some of the same roles because they're choosing the people coming out of the bigger schools. And so I think companies really need to hold themselves to account and say, if we are really committed to building diversity within our company, are we cutting ourselves off at the knees here by this limited scope of where we are finding and seeing talent? I think companies need to hold themselves accountable. Hiring managers need to hold themselves accountable. If they have a person of color and a white person who's coming out of Harvard, and a person of color who isn't, at what point are we going to give somebody a chance? And it's not a chance. I mean, they've earned it, right? Like, who says that the college they came out of isn't just as great? But it's just this, it's challenging our mindset around where good talent comes from that is so essential if we're going to change this up.
Oh yeah, and Harvard and Yale, they're very expensive colleges, so it's not accessible to most people at all.
That's right. That's right.
And so just as an employer, what are some things that as an employer you have to be aware about when you're building or even having a diverse workforce? What are some things that you have to watch out for, or some tips with that?
Well, I think so much of the focus in building a diverse workforce has traditionally been on getting a diverse workforce built, and not enough focus has been put on creating a culture that works for everybody. So as an example, we were working, so, you know, it's very common to do employee engagement surveys as an example. But what often is not measured on employee engagement surveys, or the data that is often not sliced, is the data around how are different demographics within your company feeling, and how is that different? So inclusion is around culture, right? It's really made up of three things: the degree to which an environment is a fair place to be, the degree to which someone can show up in an environment as authentic, and the degree to which they feel a sense of belonging. So belonging, fairness, authenticity. There are ways to measure how big a sense of belonging, authenticity, and fairness people feel, right? It's just that we don't often measure those things. When we do, and we've done this work, we're starting to do some early work with clients around measuring the level of inclusion. We did a really interesting survey and conversation with a tech company where they had some early feedback from the prior engagement survey that people on the fringes of age, like the majority of their company, were 28 to 45, and the people that were on the older side or the younger side were feeling marginalized. It was a really, it was a company where the engineering team were sort of like the hero function within the organization, and they had some early feedback that people in administrative functions or sales and marketing functions or HR functions, finance functions, were feeling on the margins. And then of course, there was a company that had very few people of color and a much less percentage of women. So we did an inclusion survey where we actually measured the degree to which you believe this place is fair, the degree to which you feel you can show up with your authentic strengths and talents, and that those things are valued, and that you're unleashed to do your best work, and the degree to which you feel a sense of belonging here, like they get me, I belong, this is my tribe. And sure enough, the white male engineers had the highest inclusion scores.
Wow.
And that the inclusion scores of white women, people of color, and people on the fringes of age and peripheral functions had lower levels of inclusion scores. And so you're from public accounting. I hate to rat out and call out public accountants right now, but I'm going to call out public accounting. I'm going to call out architecture, because we've done some work in those companies too. And the gaps in the inclusion scores in public accounting, at least the companies we've worked with in public accounting and in architecture, are just vast. It is like essentially the white guys think everything is great. Of course I can show up with my authentic self here. And the people of color and the women are like, wow, you know, no, I'm not feeling as valued. So you get what you measure, and not enough companies are actually measured if they're creating an environment and a culture that works for everybody.
That is interesting that you say that. And I mean, being an accountant, have worked in accounting for a while. Knowing some engineers, I would say we're probably more on the technical side. So we're not exactly your people, you know, the warm fuzzy people, the high eyes out there. We're more probably your introvert, technical, don't even talk very much kind of people. And so, and you're right, you know, when you're already feeling imposter syndrome, like I mentioned, right, being a minority, because we are a lot of times the only one there, right? We're the only ones there. We're the only one that looks like ourselves. And the people that do look like us in the company, if they are there, they're secretarial or they are janitor, right? Level, to be honest with you, you know, and when you have a crowd that's not very friendly, not very inviting, you're feeling more like you're not really wanted even more. So it's almost like certain professions have to learn to kind of come out of themselves more to create an environment where people feel welcome and really part of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's brain science data behind this thing called inclusion, right? I mean, you can look on functional MRIs when people feel, so sort of tracing the dots between when I perceive an environment as fair versus when I perceive an environment as unfair, like the same people are getting, here's what I hear, oh, you know, the same people are getting promoted. Oh yeah, we have people in interview loops, but they're not getting hired. People who discover they're getting paid less than someone else, because even though we're all not supposed to talk about salaries, people can sniff that out. Right? They find ways to figure that out.
Especially millennials. Millennials will find out what everybody's making.
They will find it out somehow, some way. But
they post it on the internet.
There's a part of our brain that lights up on a functional MRI when we feel lack of fairness. And it's called the disgust center of the brain. And when people feel disgusted, they're not as engaged. They don't want to give as much of their discretionary effort, right? When people show up to work and they feel like they got to put on a suit of armor and become somebody else before they walk through the door, it's exhausting. They have to spend a lot of mental real estate deciding how to be, how to show up. Is this okay? Should I say it like that? If I say it like that, what are the implications? I mean, I think people that just are accepted and sort of part of the mainstream, and myself included, right? I mean, I've learned so much about what I don't have to think about because of my advantages and my privilege and my whiteness, you know? But I often will be in a room and I'll ask people, to what degree can you show up as authentic at work? One is I'm constantly thinking and overthinking how I show up. 5 is I don't even understand the question. What do you mean? Can I show up authentic, right? And I've asked this question in rooms lots of times. It's an informal data. I should have been capturing it by now and writing a study on it at this point. But it's very common that the people who look like everyone else in the company are higher on the scale. They'll throw up a 4 or 5. And the only people that I've ever had ask me, wait, I don't understand the question. What do you mean, can I show up authentically? 100% of the people that ask that question have been white men.
Wow.
And it's really powerful though to look around the room and to see people of color and women typically holding up like 2s, 3s, occasionally a 4. And there's really a disparity in terms of how authentically people can show up without overthinking their behavior and their words.
Right.
So it takes a toll after a while.
It does. And then it's also stereotypes too, right? There are stereotypes where, you know, the media, you know, if you watch rap videos or things like that, you know, and there's perceptions of people being less smart or more, you know, maybe dishonest. When there's these biases like this or the stereotypes, you're constantly fighting against those too. And wondering, are people thinking of me this way? Because you're fighting stereotypes also.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the final things I would say that I just think is so important is that I know there are some people that are truly bad. Okay. But most
that's every race
in companies are not sitting in a room on the side, you know, scheming about how do we keep the women and the people of color out. In fact, the whole world is screaming for more diversity in our companies, and yet it's still not happening very quickly. So I think it's really important to point out some of the things that are the blockers. So left to our own devices as human beings, without challenging ourselves, we are inclined to surround ourselves with people who act, look, feel, and come from similar places that we do. And so I can't tell you how many times I've worked with mostly white male executive teams who in their heart are completely committed to diversity. And yet when you ask them the question, you know, here's an exercise actually any of you can do in your own companies, is just sit down at an executive level meeting and ask a few questions. Say, I want you to write down the names of the people that are like your top 5 names in the drawer. These are the people that you value so much, like you are some version of screwed if they leave this company. You highly value them. They play a significant role in the success of your team or your business. Write down those names. Okay, now I want you to think about when you have a critical decision to make and you got to call somebody on after work hours or on the weekend, or, you know, the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting that are always happening in business. Who are those people you lean on? Who do you call? Who do you meet with? Whose office do you pop by? Okay, now just write down those names. Okay, now if you socialize with anyone outside of work, on the weekends, after hours, dinners, whatever, happy hours. I just want you to write down those 5 names. Like who are the typical people you hang out with outside of work that are from work? And then just look at all the names you wrote down and just tell me, is there a theme?
There will be.
There's a theme.
There will be.
Usually those people look, act, come from similar places that you do. And if we're going to change diversity numbers and environments of inclusion, like I loved your story about how proactively people were coming by your office, come to lunch with us. You know, it's like, that's it. That's perfect. You know, to include people and to get to know them as human beings, but also to say, I might call someone else to consult with on this decision. Maybe I will sponsor somebody new besides the usual suspects, you know? Maybe I will make a hiring decision that is outside of the university I went to or the last company I worked at. You know, it's like, maybe I will spread my wings. Maybe I will give more people access to influencing me if you're a leader. It's huge. It's so important. And I think that's the part that's overlooked. People think it lies on a spreadsheet somewhere, but it doesn't. I mean, it does, but it also just lies on like your own personal choices.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, a lot of us that are here with us today, a lot of us, you know, like I said, we have our Profit First Professionals group with us today. And a lot of us are acting in a consultant capacity or even a coach capacity for our clients. And, you know, a question, we have the ability to influence our clients in terms of strategy and where they go. In terms of diversity, how do we bring this up to our clients in order to get them thinking about it?
In order to get them thinking about diversity.
Mm-hmm. And,
well,
the need for it.
And the need for it. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is connect it to things they already care a whole lot about. So how I often am not in the presence of people who, I made a decision a while ago to preach to the converted and to generally, and because it's very, very hard to change someone's mind if they don't think diversity is important. I would much rather spend my time and energy, generally speaking, on people who already know it's important, but who just don't really know how to make progress. That is like my favorite kind of client, right? And thankfully, there are more and more people that fall into that category. But if you're working with someone who just doesn't get why diversity is important, and they say things like, it's all just based on merit, or isn't neurodiversity enough, or can't you have a room full of white people and isn't there enough diversity right there? Well, you know, I think one is you can point to the data, but the second is just say, what is important to you right now? Where is your business going? What goals do you most want to achieve in the next 3, 6, 12 months, 5 years, et cetera? Who's your customer demographic? Who are you serving or who are you selling to? And then connecting how diversity, having a more diverse set of employees, can help to serve those goals that they already have and are already sure are important. I think too often, like us diversity professionals come at it from why we think it's important. And like any negotiation or any influence situation, the first thing is to understand what's important to the other person and to put your viewpoints or your data or your suggestions through the lens of that and connecting those dots, because often they just don't connect the dots. You know, like I've heard from clients so many times, they say, I know this is important, but we just don't have time for it. But if you ask it a different way and you say, what are you making time for? What is really important? What do you have to get right in the next 12 months to serve your shareholders, your board, your customers, et cetera? And they tell you those things, and then you back into how diversity can help them achieve those things. It's
I love
a deeper conversation.
That is really good. Now, Mitch, I know our audience has some questions. We got two parts of our audiences too. We have one on Facebook, and we also have some folks that are on Zoom. So let's go ahead and take a look at questions that we might have.
Susanne, you know something we talked about, you and I, before this webinar started, that I feel like a responsibility to say?
Okay, sure.
That you and I agreed. You had a question about, that you didn't ask directly to me here, but you had before, which was, what should an employer be aware of when dealing with a minority workforce? So especially now where there's so much up, thankfully, you know, around race, I've heard many folks say, oh, I'm going to open up conversations with my, you know, African-American employees. And you and I talked about how important it is to educate yourself first, to do your homework, to show before you go and open up a conversation with a minority employee about how they're doing, how they're feeling. Yes, absolutely. You can say, hey, I care, and I imagine you're in some pain, and I'm sorry, I care. But it's like educating yourself first before expecting people of color to educate you, I think is really important right now. And
Definitely.
you had said that you're one of those people, maybe you can just tell the story yourself, like as being pretty open, but that not everybody's there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that personality-wise, I am pretty open. I did go out and buy clothes when the secretary told me to not wear jeans anymore. So, I mean, I think generally I'm pretty open as a person, but not everyone is. Like I said, there are sensitivities. There are people that are dealing with generations of abuse and things that have happened in their family that stem even from slavery. And so there is a sensitivity in some cases. I think the best thing you can do is get to know your staff, get to know them personally, and you'll find out who is open to talk. And then also keep the standard the same. If we should not be wearing jeans, if Susanne should not be wearing jeans, then nobody should be wearing jeans, right? Nobody should be wearing jeans. And we literally just have the same standard across. You set your standard and everyone applies, and that way everybody feels the same. No one's being singled out.
Someone on Zoom had a question too. Is it okay to answer one more question?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
I have to drop off, but the question is, what is a good approach to developing a D&I program for a small startup? And I think this is a great question and such an opportunity, because what happens with so many companies is they get big and then they decide they have an issue, a problem, and they want to fix it. And it's so much harder to do then. So if you're small, you're at a real advantage to get this right from the beginning. By being very conscientious about how do you do pipeline management? How are you tapping into and hiring diverse folks from the beginning? Sitting down at a leadership team level first and saying, who do we serve? Because like you said, Susanne, ideally you're inside, who you hire and who you have doing the work internally matches the people that you serve. And so if you serve all kinds of different communities and yet your culture or demographics internally are pretty same, right? Getting very clear, hey, in 3 years' time, if we're sitting right now with a mostly male executive team, for instance, and mostly white, saying in 3 years' time, we want this team to look differently. And then choosing folks to hire and sponsor and mentor along and like shepherd their careers so that they are your next level of hires for that executive level, right? That's big. So if someone hasn't started anything, I would say start at the senior level, proving the business case, asking yourself some really hard questions around what do we want to create and why, and going from there.
I think that's excellent. I definitely think that's excellent. And like my experience, the internship program, right? Because, that's the time in a person's life where you can really mold them to really be a fit for your company. And interns, if you get the right one, they're willing to work hard. It's the work ethic. And I think that's why the senior vice president liked me. He liked me that I was working the day after Thanksgiving cutting fabric, right? and again, it's finding the right attitude and bringing them in at a young enough point in their career that you can still mold them and develop them. Just like Mitch said, to become the next executive is where you want to go with that. Thank you guys so much for joining in today. You guys are the movers, the shakers. You guys are small businesses are the backbones of America, and we will create the opportunities that really create the opportunities for everyone to have a life that they can pursue liberty and happiness. Thank you guys for attending today. I am grateful for you guys attending, and I will see you guys next time.
Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you.